Well, thank you all so much for joining us today for Kentucky Spins Tuesday Tips. We are going to be talking about tips for math strategies today, and we're very happy to have Kimberly Snowball with us. I will be introducing her in just a few minutes. But first, I'm Stella Beard with Kentucky Spin, and we're very happy that you've joined us today. I want to give you just a little bit of information about Kentucky Spin before we get started. Kentucky SPIN is the Kentucky Special Parent Involvement Network. We are the Parent Training and Information Center for the state of Kentucky. We're actually funded by the U.S. Department of Education under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We have actually been the Parent Training and Information Center since 1988, and that was when Kentucky first received the PTI grant. And I'm happy to say we just recently were approved again for 5 years, so we will get to continue to provide training, information, and support for children and youth with all types of disabilities, birth through age 26. And we work with families, parents, and professionals, and also folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But at Kentucky SPIN, one of the things we do not do is we do not act as attorneys. Therefore, we are not going to be providing legal advice or anything like that to anyone that we come in contact with. However, we do effectively advocate for families and their children, and we also empower families. We provide peer support and help families access needed information and resources. And all of our staff and consultants are either parents who have a child or a young adult with an intellectual or developmental disability. We're either a sibling or we have a disability ourselves. And I myself have a 24-year-old named Clayton with an intellectual disability. So I've been through the special education process, and I am so excited that I get to help families every day find those resources and supports that they need to help them understand education and lots of other resources that are available. I always show this slide on our webinars because I think it says a lot, especially for what we've been going through in 2020. But it says, together we can accomplish great things for our children. And none of us have all the answers, but we're all working through this pandemic and adjusting as we go. And I think that has been the theme for 2020, is just adjusting as we go. We can make all the greatest plans in the world, but I've found through 2020, we have to be very flexible and know that those plans could change at any given moment. And I think we all can say yes, amen to that one. I want to give you just a little bit of information. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see what we call a dashboard. On that dashboard, there is a couple of drop-down boxes that I want to make you aware of. The first one is called handouts. If you go over to the little arrow that says handouts and drop that box down, you will see two resources that are available for you. One is a handout that Kimberly has provided for us, which is kind of a parent guide, and it has some wonderful math resources that will be very, very helpful. The other one is the PowerPoint presentation that she will be showing here in just a moment. Those are available for you to download right now, or I will let you know later this afternoon, we will be sending a follow-up email, and all of these resources will be available for you in that follow-up email. So if you choose not to download them now, just know they will be coming out to you if you provided an email address for us later this afternoon. The other thing I want to make you aware of on your dashboard is a little arrow that says questions. Anytime you have a question throughout the presentation, please feel free to type that question in the box. I also have Kelly and Michaela on the call with me also from Kentucky SPIN, and they will be helping monitor questions today throughout the presentation. Also, we will have this available for replay in a couple of weeks on our website, and you will get a link to that also in your follow-up email today of where you can go back and check and see when this presentation will be uploaded. It will be a couple of weeks. We do send it off to have it closed caption, and so then it will be available for others to get to review. I am very happy to say we have Kimberly Snowball with us, and she's a professional learning coach with the Northern Kentucky Cooperative for Educational Services. And we have partnered with a lot of our special education co-ops around the state for our webinars and our Tuesday tips. And I'm so happy that Kimberly is here today to help us understand some math strategies during the pandemic and virtual learning that our students are experiencing right now. So Kimberly, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you. Wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, I am going to make you our presenter. So you should be getting the screen here shortly, and you'll be able to share with us your PowerPoint.
Thank you. I appreciate all that you do, and that is wonderful that you'll be with us for another 5 years, sharing the resources that are needed as we all work together. So good morning. I am excited to share some tips. But what I wanted to do is just have you just sit in a cozy environment, and if you don't have a cozy environment, close your eyes right now if you're in an office or in a different area, just because math sometimes elicits some stress, and it seems that it is doesn't need to happen. So like was stated earlier, in the handouts, you will see a page like this, and these are all hyperlinks. So if you open them up, you'll be able to click and it'll take you directly to any of the resources. There are some recommended sites and resources up top. There are additional resources, and then the actual virtual manipulative shelves that I'll share with you today, you'll be able to download your own version and have them accessible to your own children. So let's begin. One of the pieces that we want to think through is, how will today go? We're going to be having some mental math today. We're going to talk about the number line and the importance of the number line, schema instruction, virtual representation. What do you notice and what do you wonder? 3-act tasks that are actually can be done at home with parents. And no educator is really needed, but these are great activities to incorporate within lessons. At the power of estimation, fluency practice, and then reminding ourselves to always ask before we tell. So we can pull that information from kids, and then to space out the practice, because that does create long-lasting information. So here we go. Mental math. Number Talks is about mental math strategies, and this is something you could easily incorporate at the dinner table, in the morning, at any given time, and it's about the ability for students to start thinking about numbers, not as just a single number, but as a combination. So decomposing, what we call decomposing, is just breaking numbers apart, and so that you look at maybe a 7 as a 5 and a 2, or a 3 and a 4, or a 6 and a 1, not so much just as a 7, and kids get hung up on that. This little video we're just going to show a little clip from is really about the asking yourself to decompose, and what kind of strategies do you bring to the table when you think about mental math.
So the first thing I'm going to ask you is just simply to write down the answer without using pen and paper. Try not to use the traditional algorithm, but work out and write down the answer for 18 times 5.
So your job right now is, what would you do if you were given the prompt 18 times 5? How could you solve it?
So you probably got that the answer is 90. But the answer is probably not the most interesting part. The most interesting part of Number Talks is really thinking about how you arrived at that answer.
So we're going to pause there. It's really about thinking. So if we prompt our children, our students to ask questions about their thinking, that's more important than the actual strategy or the answer itself. And so we need to be thinking of classrooms and mathematics is really not about a single answer, but just about how do you problem solve. Sorry.
Just simply to write down the answer without using pen and paper.
So as I said, it's about mental math. So it's about not pen and paper. Where do they begin? So one of the strategies is really called a doubling and halving strategies. And so if you think through all your mental math, and I love to do this because when I would ask adults about this exact problem, you could see people creating a mental whiteboard and then doing the traditional algorithm where they're putting 18 on top, and what they're experiencing is not problem solving, but just doing a rote procedure. And so if we think about all the other ways that we can help students decompose numbers, halving and doubling is one of these strategies, and it's not always the go-to one, but there are some problems that are really easy to have in your to do with mental math this way. So 18 times 5, instead of lining it up vertically, we line it up horizontally to prevent students from going back to that traditional algorithm. And then we think about 18 is really not an 18, it's a 9 and a 2, 9 multiplied by 2. Well, if we just use the associative property, we can actually regroup this problem into 9 times 2 times 5, and then all of a sudden this problem is a very easy mental math problem to do. And so giving students ample opportunity. Sometimes they don't know what they don't know, so we can show this strategy to them. They might have already created the strategy, but sometimes we then create even more chaos in mathematics because we tell them we need to do this other procedure, which then doesn't really make sense to them if they're already decomposing numbers and working through them. So that traditional algorithm, versus a common strategy. Another one could be 20 times 5, where you actually do the 20 times 5, and you're going to friendly numbers. And so you're getting 100, but then you're realizing that it really wasn't 20 times 5, it was really 18 times 5. So I have 2 5s too many, so I need to subtract them off and get them. And students, if you ask them and not tell them first, you will get an opportunity for to hear some really exciting ways that students do mathematics, and that's about the problem solving, not so much about the answer. And so if we think about this particular video, Stanford University students have multiple different ways to actually solve problems. The least efficient was the actual traditional algorithm, because they, you can see them go through and try to do the traditional algorithm by creating a mental whiteboard. We're not going to take time to watch the video, but
we're going to hear now from some staff.
But what we want to do is we want to just know that it's really important that we give students opportunities to share their thinking. Another mental math strategy, which I think is just good for parents to be aware of, is subtraction. Sometimes is about, in the traditional sense, about regrouping, or we used to call it borrowing, and then that didn't make sense because what did that really mean in the concepts of what subtraction is. And so if I ask you to solve this mentally, this does involve that process of regrouping or borrowing from the 40s, and then and it becomes a process that is a little bit more complex. But if we go through and we think of this problem, and I put on top of here's a number line. So if I think of the number line 18 through 49, and I think, well, what is really 46 subtract 18 really asking? It's just the distance or the difference between these two numbers. So what is the we call it the constant difference in Sherry Parrish's book, as well as I believe Ruth Parker's book on number talks. But if we rethink, and students might naturally do this, go back to a friendly number, just literally taking that same length, that line segment, and shifting it down and restating the problem, not so much as 46 minus 18, but maybe we're going to be thinking it as 48 subtract 20, and all of a sudden now mentally we can solve this problem because we understand the concepts of constant difference when we're subtracting positive numbers and whole numbers. And so we can constantly give students the opportunities in our household to just do these types of problems, which will make them more efficient when they're just needing to do a mental math strategy. And we all use mental math so many times. Not everyone's breaking out, the calculators or the paper and pencil, but they should feel confident enough to actually attempt some of these strategies. And so here we go. It's about shifting, not thinking 21 subtract 16, but maybe we shift it and we one space to the left, yet the distance will be the same. So all of a sudden now the problem is 20 subtract 5. So, and we can do the same thing with fractions on a number line. I know when we think of fractions, this is like, I feel like this is the image that parents have in their head, like, no, not fractions. We really need to get away from the fear of fraction because they're numbers just like anyone else. And so if I ask you about this problem, 2/3 subtract 1/2, all of a sudden, we're trying in our minds, and you might be doing this right now, going, oh, God, I have nothing. I have no strategy. Now I got to think common denominator. But if we look at this and we think of this as a visual representation, a mental whiteboard in our head of a number line, number lines don't always need to be whole numbers. And as students get older, they need to be having some experience with number lines that are an open number line, or maybe a number line that can be broken into fractions. So here's the power of a number line. Remember the problem I just gave you, 2/3 subtract 1/2. Well, if I take and I divide the number line into halves, then I've got the 0, the half, and the 1. And then if I, on that same number line, I say, let's divide it also into thirds, 1/3, 2/3. And then I think to myself, well, could I, in fact, I need to know the distance between this 2/3 and this 1/2. That's the area, or that's the distance, linear distance, that is the answer that I'm seeking. And so I need to have them all, I need to figure out what this is. And so if I have all of my lines divided into these intervals, then I realize these intervals, in fact, are 1/6. And so it's about just giving students opportunities to think through mathematics, not so much as this is needs to be done as a procedure, but more as a way to have multiple opportunities and multiple pathways to solve the problem. So 2/3 could then, I could be thinking about what is 1/2, what is 2/3 on a number line. The number line is powerful. The other piece that, I talked about a little bit at the very beginning was schema, or I just introduced it, was schema instruction. And Dr. Sarah Powell is a wonderful doctor of mathematics, where she describes at the Iris Center about helping students understand that there are really, throughout all of their mathematics, they will always be thinking about additive schemas and multiplicative schemas. So they, like you're going to be breaking problems into total. Is it a total problem, a difference problem, a change problem? And the same thing when we get into multiplying, which we, just say multiplicative schemas. Schemas are like that, ideas. How are these problems set up? Are they equal groups problems, comparison? And so I'm just highlighting the Iris Center because you can go on there and there are plenty of examples of what this really looks like and in each one of these, so that we can support what students as students are developing strategies to attack word problems. And if you are also just wanting some how-tos, she also has this is Dr. Sarah Powell, and I've included this on in the handout that that was sent, so that you can, in fact, go to her, Dr. Sarah Powell. If you just Google Dr. Sarah Powell, you'll find her, and she has quite a few how-to videos just within that her site. So let me go back here, and I'm going to go ahead. When we highlighted visual representations, I wanted to make sure that we understand that that this is research-based, assisting students when they're struggling in mathematics for elementary, middle school, and then this is also, visual representations are a strong strategy for solving in high school any types of problems. And so we sometimes right now don't have access to all the manipulatives, to be able to draw accurate representations, because we might be trying to force fit some types of visual representations into a math problem. What we want to do is we want to think through this CSA of maths, and it's really concrete, semi-concrete, and abstract. And so some of the concrete items are literally physical items that the kids can count. So when they're in elementary school, sometimes we're taking beans and counters and two-sided chips, and but the tools that we have might be limited now that we're at home learning, and it also might be limited even if you're in a brick and mortar school because of resources that are available within that the district. So concrete is our preferred, like really that's like going back to like having kids move and manipulate the actual item. But semi-concrete, there's a lot of research about semi-concrete. That means that you can take virtual manipulatives and still gain some conceptual knowledge of and be able to break down a problem and understand it. I know that even as an adult and an educator of mathematics, I still take time when given a problem that might be more complex and draw it out. And that doesn't mean that that my intellect is less in mathematics. It just means that that is a strategy that is used, and we need to foster that with students, to use that, not to think that is a crutch, but it's just a problem solving. So, and then that is abstract. Some students can jump right into just abstract if they're problem solving by just using the numbers only. But some might then say, well, that doesn't make sense yet. So then they might jump back to the semi-concrete, and then they might go even further back and grab concrete manipulatives to actually understand what's really going on. But know that this is a continuum that you should be able to enter at any stage and float through. So you might just decide that a drawing is perfectly is all that you need before you actually solve the abstract problem. And some might just jump right here. Just know that we support all three of these as strong problem solving in their instructional strategies as we move forward. And so you can start here and jump. It's just a continuum of services. So here's an example of what we want to talk about when we talk about jumping in for a virtual manipulative into this would be considered semi-concrete because it's a virtual manipulative that's on the screen. If I had the actual base 10 blocks in my hand and I was manipulating them and dropping them into hundreds and tens and ones place, then that would be taking it a step back. And sometimes as simply as just drawing them in here can also be considered the visual representation. So if I ask you to make the number 42 using the base 10 blocks, you could then just drag these over and move them through. If I'm going to jump back real quick. There are 3 different opportunities here. And so what we do is teachers is we exit out of present mode and we allow students to be in that almost like the editor mode, and we grab these and we drag them to create the 4 10s. But we would need to be out of the present mode because we need students to be able to do this. And sometimes when we're doing one-on-one, we can do this. And then we would grab our ones. And there's a whole tutorial on how do we make these on a Google slide. That's really not the point today, but it's about taking and creating opportunities for students to think through conceptually what numbers mean. So we can then give them another opportunity because we need to practice, and then we need to make sure that they're doing it independently. So it's an I do, a we do, I do is I show them how to do it, then I would do it, we do it together. Where do you, by asking questions, where do you think this one goes? And then remember, ask, not tell. If it's about modeling so they know what you're expecting, that's different than telling them the answers, but asking them is so much more powerful because it creates the opportunity for them to exercise their brain by using retrieval practice, where they think about it and they have to retrieve the information, and that creates long-lasting learning. So this is kind of what I was sharing with you at the very beginning when we talked about that additional resource guide. In the center of that, there is this slide deck link that will get you access to all of these shelves of virtual manipulatives, so that all you would have to do is click on one of these. If you're like, oh, I think I need some, 10 frames, or maybe I need some base 10 blocks. Maybe I need some virtual pattern blocks, fraction tiles, geoboards, maybe a timer, maybe some Cuisenaire rods. These are all math manipulatives that come into play when we're in class learning face to face. I also highly recommend that if your students are using a calculator, that they use this particular calculator on this slide. And then if they're elementary, and if they're, oops, I'm gonna jump ahead one more time. Oops, sorry. It's a little farther down the slide deck than I remember, but there's another slide that's on that handout, or another link that has the middle school and high school. But these are the calculators that they'll need to use if they're going to be testing on the state. And we want the tools to be familiar with them and not to be a barrier. So we can give them opportunities to use the types of calculators that they're going to be using for state testing. Then we want to make sure that we have the most access to those types of tools. So again, this can be a little bit overwhelming, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of like jump out again to show you that if this is the slide deck you have, you can copy any of these. Like if I just touch that, I can jump right there. But I also can just, if this is a little overwhelming, I could put these all on separate slides. I could drag them to an activity and then insert them on an activity that the students are doing virtually. So teachers and parents, and you can share these with your parents or your teachers as well, and say, hey, these are some really great manipulatives, because the more people have access to the types of manipulatives that they can use at home, the better we are. When we go back to brick and mortar, we'll still have access to these, so that we can think through all of the tools that students may need to be successful. One of the other pieces that I wanted to just share with you is another tip, is that if you, there's a great called Stair Tailored YouTube channel, and it's Dr. Sarah Powell is the host of some of these, but also her team from Project Stair. It's the National Center for Intensive Intervention. That the National Center for Intensive Intervention has links to different resources to help teach students conceptually, but it might be a little bit overwhelming. And so they put together these short little snippet videos. And one of them is about subtracting integers using two colored counters. And so if your teacher's asking about that, you might be able to pull this up, or you might be able to share again, with other teachers. But here's what I've done, is just created like a little tutorial. And then I actually just copied that the two-sided chips from that library that I had on all those shelves, and I dropped it right on here. And I created just a way for students to refresh how to use two colored counters, or sometimes they're called two-sided chips. But it's about having resources at the students' fingertips, as and not having to hunt for them if they don't have these types of manipulatives. Now, there's other ones on adding integers with two-sided chips, but what we're going to do is we're going to Just listen just for a little bit.
University of Texas at Austin, and today we're working on adding integers using two-color counters. So we're going to do two problems here today. We're going to do 4 plus negative 5, and then we'll do negative 2 plus 6. So I'm going to show what this looks like using two-color counters. Let's go ahead and get started. So here are the two problems that we are doing today. 4 plus negative 5 is the first problem. So let's focus right now on this problem. Now I'm going to use two-color counters to.
And so what I wanted you just to be aware of is that these are very simply done so that it doesn't require, a lot of technology, and we can't, and it's just about the same things that we can be doing, and you could replicate this exact problem to help students at home. So here's a problem that I just created in the slide deck to say, what if I was subtracting integers? And so my problem is 4 subtract negative 7. And so one of the most common pieces, even for adults, is like, how can I subtract negative 7 here if I don't even have negative 7 at my disposal? And so what I have over here is showing you, this is considered a zero pair, and they cancel each other out. The yellow is a positive 1 and the red is a negative 1. And so I could add as many zero pairs as I want, and then once I pair them off and remove the zero pairs, then I really would be left with just still this positive 4. But how do I solve this problem? I could have students model what this problem looks like. And so I'm going to do an I do just with you right now. So I have added 7 zero pairs. And the reason I've added 7, not 6, not 8, is because I need to have 7 negative colored chips in the on the paper or in my bank, in my hands, so that I can then remove them. So this problem still really is just 4, positive 4. The value of all of these chips right now is still just positive 4. But now I have added enough zero pairs so that I can subtract the 7. So if I boxed around, I remove them, and then what I'm left with is the final answer. So we look at, we have 4 positives and 7 more positive. That's why it is positive 11. And sometimes we proceduralize, like with songs and, to help students. And mnemonics are a great way for them to help understand the steps. But conceptually understanding, how can this even happen? How can I have 4 and then now I have 11 and it's a subtraction problem? It needs to be explained in a way that helps students conceptually understand that there is that 0 is a number, and we can, in fact, do this problem again on a number line. But these two-sided chips using visual representation and virtual manipulatives is very powerful. This is the other slide I was wanting to show you. If you have students that are in middle school and high school, these are the graphing calculators and the scientific calculators that you would want students to access and to know how to utilize them in a virtual setting, so that if they're doing online testing or any types of assessment, that they become proficient using this and that the calculator is not the barrier. There are other manipulatives that are used in the middle school years, like algebra tiles, but you also see many of the same ones. You'll see a protractor, the geo boards. You will see a balanced scale. And we've left some of these other pieces in case students are still struggling in middle school and high school with money. Money is a concept that even today, when I go to restaurants, there's sometimes it's not a strength, and we need to be giving them opportunities to utilize them as well. But again, these slides are available to you. I was talking about algebra tiles a few minutes ago, and so I wanted to show you how you can use algebra tiles. This is the the explicit view. Usually algebra tiles do not have the variables on the actual printed on the tiles, and as well as the numbers on the ones, so what we call the constants. But for explaining how algebra tiles work, the long green bars are considered the x variables, and the same color coordination are used in algebra tiles for the negative and positive ones. So if I put a positive 1 and a negative 1 together, I would have a 0 pair. And so you can utilize algebra tiles, and that's one tool to pull down if students are needing to simplify an expression. So here's this expression here. It's not an equation because it doesn't have an equal sign, so we're really just wanting to simplify it, and that means using the distributive property. So what does 3 times the quantity x minus 2 really look like? Well, this quantity really is just x and with minus 2 or negative 2. But I have 3 of them, and so now I have another one of these groups and another. So I have 3 of the groups, x minus 2. Now, if I simplify that, then I could say, well, how many x's do we have altogether? We have 3 x's. How many negative 1s do we have? We have 6. So this simplified expression would be 3x minus 6. And then another example to help them. Here's one where it's 2 of the 2x's minus 2. And so using these algebra tiles helps students visually represent what is going on here in this very abstract looking and sometimes scary expression. Especially, when students are thinking, what do we do? Is this 2 supposed to be, being distributed to the 2x or just the x? And then a lot of times students don't distribute the 2 through all of the terms within the expression or within the parentheses. So they get something like 4x plus 2. But if you use algebra tiles, these visual representations that are powerful, you can then say, here's one x plus 2, here's the other x plus 2. Now there's no way that they're going to get 2x or 4x plus 2 because they now can visually see that there are 4 positive 4s, or there are 4 positive 1s in the on the page now. And so we can see also here how we can use the negative, which is the red rectangle, to represent the negative x term. And then we can actually create the same atmosphere visual representing all these so that we can simplify the expression. I feel like I've been talking for a very long time. Has there been any questions that have popped up in the chat box?
We do have a few. One of them is, are there any resources for parents trying to help their children when they are struggling to understand the math concepts themselves?
When the parents are struggling to understand the math concepts? Was that the question?
Yes. Yes.
We are living in an age where really it is wonderful to just get on the internet and just type in that exact question. And so I've created some resources that will help. There are the IES documents that are on that. I think it's at the top, but the IES documents sometimes share out, but that would be looking through a document that's a little bit lengthy. My go-to is really just Googling it, and then all of a sudden you will see a multitude of videos. And so I would just, type in the exact question, or type in, how do I explain this, or how to use manipulatives to model this. And the same thing with the resources from this Stair-Taylor project. There are lots of little video clips that help explain what's going on and what's the math behind there. There are 3 books that are my go-tos for all it's a K2 book, there's a 3 through 5 book, and then there is a 6 through 8 if you're talking about kindergarten through 8th grade, that are from John Vanderwall, that basically describe all the different mathematics that happen within those grades, and do a very good job at explaining the mathematics in a very friendly language. So if I'll give more information about that at the end. Okay. Any question? Anything else?
One more question. It says, if my child with a disability has trouble understanding complex or semi-concrete math, can I request that they teach my child with concrete math strategies in their IEP?
Most likely it's probably in there as a scaffolded, because it's concrete, semi-concrete, and abstract. But yes, that's a very good request. That would be a strong there's a lot of evidence to show the concrete manipulatives, and many times what I've seen on IEPs when we're looking at services is that manipulatives have been checked on an IEP so that they are required. It's just a great way to build that knowledge. Okay, are we good now, or anything else?
I think that was all we have right now.
Okay, thank you. So again, providing enough practice for students is another key piece, and that we space out practice is so powerful. So we also want to make math fun. We want to make math inquisitive, and problem solving is like a foundation. Kids having these problem solving skills and what we call sometimes is these notice and wonders. That's like the entry point for all students. And so these 3-act tasks are what we're going to kind of like look at. So here's an example of a 3-act task by Graham Fletcher, where he just simply gives these problems. And all these 3-act tasks is just little video clips of a problem. And then he has like a little sheet where you can add your notice and wonders and make an estimate. And so this would be like the great apple eat-off. So let's just kind of like look at how this would go. And these are all accessible to parents. So here we are I'm trying to capture this in the.
All right, here we go. The great apple eat-off. Sister against sister. On your marks, get set.
And he does these with his own children. These little videos. He is a dynamic speaker. So then he does the fast forward because it takes a little bit longer. Okay, and then he asks you to like these questions like, which girl won by eating more of her apples? Estimate. So based on the video clip, which was a little bit longer, then he has the answer. He shows the answer. But the big part is that like there are these other questions that you can start looking at, like the notice and wonder questions. And so my big takeaway from these 3-act tasks are that parents can do the same type of thinking activities as just asking kids when they're attempting a problem, what do you notice and what do you wonder? So write down all the things that that you see, and then some things that you're not so sure about before they even attack a problem. That's a pivotal strategy, and we know that it just gives the kids an entry point instead of giving up right away. Okay. In high school, there's also other things like Dan Meyer. He does also the 3-act tasks. So they're like middle school and high school level. And so I've included these links as well in your additional handout so that you can look through them. And the wonderful thing is that if you're looking for sharing resources and sharing activities and sharing some just some math activities for your kids. It's about providing them, with these activities that incorporate estimation. One of the pieces that we find out is that if you're looking for a strategy to help students, they need to make sense of the problem. So ask them to estimate an answer. Don't ask them to solve it, but ask them just to estimate. What do you think the answer could be? Find the reasonableness in it. And so I've created this this link also in that guide because I wanted you to have the option to create other estimation types of activities yourself for students. So if we go to like estimation 180, well, it doesn't seem like it's heading there at this point, but if we go to estimation 180, which is the link that's on there, you might in fact, you'll have all these video clips. If I go back, you'll have all these video clips of different scenarios. Maybe it's like how many of these cheese puffs will fit on this cookie sheet, and then they show the cheese puffs, they show the size of the cookie sheet. We can do that at home as well with our students to foster this sense of thinking. It's really about that thinking and making sense of the problem. These are the students are should be looking for patterns and using their tools and that they have and creating visual representations just to make sense of the mathematics. And that's a big strength that we can, as parents, provide them with those opportunities just to stop and think and to notice, to wonder, and to estimate. And not worry so much about that final answer at this point, but then the process of how you're solving it and then sending that in. So if students are struggling, I, as a mathematics teacher, I would want to see this is, the process in which they actually solved it more than this an answer, because the process helps me determine next steps as a teacher. And so when students go, why do I have to show my work? It's not because we want just you to have busy time. It's because that gives me clues on maybe some misconceptions or some strengths. And so those are the pieces that we as parents and as educators need to foster that type of learning environment. Now, the next one is about fluency activities, and I'm thinking about fluency can be done 1 to 2 minutes every day. It's not something that that needs to be half an hour, each day, but just a brief, while they're eating breakfast, while they're brushing their teeth, while they're getting dressed in the morning, we can embed these rich opportunities. I have a picture of counting on the fingers because I want to debunk a misconception. Dr. Jo Boaler out of Stanford University, you saw a little snippet of her when we were talking about this mental math. She also has an article in on her U Cubed, and it's YOUCUBED, her site that talks about fluency and that fingers are friendly. We use them even as adults as tracking mechanisms, and so to have fingers being thought of as the don't use your fingers, don't that's so not the way we need to to move forward. There's studies that actually talk about the connection between students being able to use their fingers as tracking as well as almost like subitizing when we're thinking of clusters. When we see 4, we don't have to count each individual. We just know 4 is 4 because we now understand that. The same thing with when we roll a single dice, we might say, okay, that's a 5 because we don't need to count the dots on there. But we've created activities and opportunities. Now, when I think of fluency activities, it can be simple, as at home. Again, using a pair of dice and doing math problems this way, students can create their own. I used to love taking card games and just having almost like multiplication war, addition war. You can do integer subtraction war if you have the reds being the negatives and the the blacks being the positive, colors, when we're flipping over cards. And so we can create simple games and these little fluency activities to help students just build some automaticity. And automaticity is different than fluency. And we want to make sure that fluency doesn't need to be fast. Automaticity is kind of what we talk about when we talk about being able to know your number facts quickly. But there are other activities that can be done. There's board games that are out there on the market that are very much like Scrabble, but with math. And so building a culture that math is not something to fear, but it is something that can be thought of as fun and engaging, and ways that will instill a love for numbers and problem solving. And like I used to do this with my own kids. I have 4 kids that are now grown adults, but we would attempt multiple ways to solve problems, and it always amazed me how many different ways, and how I thought I raised my kids all the same, but they all have different approaches into problem solving. I'm going to just go quickly through some of these fluency types of activities that you can see and do with kids at home. Copy, cover, and compare, where you're basically the students are copying the problem. They're going to cover it, and then they're going to so they've got the problem. They're going to cover it. Sorry, it's cover, copy, and then compare it to what they just done. And that just builds a little bit of fluency. And these are from Dr. Sarah Powell, and I believe these are well, I don't want to misquote, so I'm just going to continue. You can do file folders where you actually have addition facts that are grouped, and what you want to do is have the students solve the problems. And then cover, so you're basically having the answers here, but you want them to be covered up or folded over. So you can fold this, have them solve, and then do a self-check. And so these can be done on whiteboards, or they can be done where, where they're just adding a sheet of paper here instead of using the same one. And it can be done quickly at home. You have taped problems where you literally audio tape this, and so you are going to so think of it this: you or the teacher can read the problem aloud. So you could have them, and then you or the teacher pause silently for 5 seconds, and while during that pause, the student's going to try to solve and try to write the solution before you say the answer. So it's trying to build some automaticity in there as well. And then this is the important piece: we need to reinforce the correct answer. So they need to hear it. And then the students need to be able to say it as well. And so they should end with the correct answer, never the incorrect answer. That's, brain-friendly science there. So again, after like 3 to 5 seconds, you should say the solution out loud and then repeat the same process for the next problem. So these are just some fluency types of problems. I love the Magic Square because it makes it kind of fun. So and these, I've given you links to Magic Square problems. So if you want to have your students just practice some Magic Square problems, each day, they come home and that, or after school, or it might be something that, you do together. But I wouldn't want to create these on my own. They're already created. There's a link for it. But basically, all you're going to do is you're going to have a bank of numbers, and you're going to have to use your addition facts to use all the numbers up one time until it all goes. The addition problems are going down vertically as well as going across from left to right. So remember, you have the benefits of Magic Square is you can list out math facts from the Magic Square. You can make notes of subtraction facts within. And then finally, this is actually an addictive game. And then I think we're almost, we're going to be out of time. Kakuma Math. You can go to Greg Tang's math activities, but I find myself getting sucked into this if you're looking for some fluency. And I'm just going to quickly just go there. You can go different levels. And if you want to hit play, you can say, I'm going to do addition, multiplication. We'll just, start with addition, and then you can start a game. If we do level, we'll just do level 2. And then kids can just do this. So they would see these numbers within this pentagon. 2 of them together will make and as time goes on, they start like clicking out. So I would do like, there's 2 problems in here that add up to another one. So I see a 2 and a 10, so I click on the 12. So I look over here, I know 1 and a 3, I click on the 4. The other problems are, if I look over here, I'm thinking, oh, okay, 3 plus 2. So I'm looking for the actual added to addition problems. And so I'm not just, it doesn't give me the problems, and it gives me some distractors. And you can build up levels. So it's fun. It becomes a little addictive. I find myself, getting sucked into it every time I go to this particular site. And so different levels, and just keep in mind that everything that we've talked about is this evidence-based. This retrieval practice is about asking, not telling, asking, not telling, and that we need to be spacing out the practice. If we have students do 30 minutes of practice, that's not as effective if we do 10 weeks of practice. Or if it's a big concept, that we schedule times to revisit it with our students. If we see that that there's a big test coming up or an assessment, we want to actually provide them and with the structure for math at this level. So I feel like we've covered quite a bit of information, and so I'm going to turn it over to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. That was some great information. And I know, at least for me, math is very overwhelming for me personally. So I would have to go back and listen again and really click in there and dive in myself. But the information is wonderful. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking to see if we have any more questions right now. I don't see any at the moment. Kelly, do you or Michaela see anything?
Are there any math sites or games online that are helpful?
I was just going to say that Greg Tang, he has quite a few math games. There are in KCM, there are rich parent games that you can play with students. I can include that. I can send that link on so that they're more downloadable and printable, but
are there any that you think that parents should stay away from?
I believe when we're talking about just doing off the top of my head, I can't think of like a specific, but I would be looking for games that are fun, engaging, but are not about procedures, that help students check their answers. So if they just move on without giving some feedback, sometimes kids can practice something over and over again and practice the wrong piece. So I don't know.
Perfect.
That was helpful. So I was hoping.
Yes.
To be.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think that is all the questions we have.
Well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. I want to just give you all just a little bit of information. Back in January, we will start again our Tuesday tips, and we will have those every Tuesday at 11. And we have one more Thursday webinar for 2020, and that will be this coming Thursday and we are actually going to be talking about mental health concerns. So we have Carol Cecil with Kentucky Partnership for Families and Children who will be our speaker. So we encourage you to join us this coming Thursday for that webinar. And then we also have a lot of great information and resources on our website on COVID-19. And again, additional educational resources that are available now during our virtual learning time. We also have a newsletter or an e-news that we send out. It usually goes out every 2 weeks. So I would encourage you to hop on our webpage and ask to be added to that. And then at the end of the presentation today, when you sign off, you will be prompted to complete our evaluation. So I encourage you to do that. So it gives us feedback on how the presentation was today and what information you might like to see in future webinars. We do have a full schedule for January and February, and you can find those on our website. In the handout, in the email, follow-up email you'll receive, you will get a link to our upcoming webinars, so you can sign up for those if you would like, and we would love to see you back on Thursday or hopefully in 2021 on our Tuesday Tips and Thursday webinars. So thank you, Kimberly, for being with us today, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you Thursday. If not, have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.